Hey, I'm Tomer. I'm head of integration at the Stellar Development Foundation. The foundation and the network have been around since 2014. Stellar is a decentralized ledger, super focused on cross-border payments. And we've got a bunch of tricks up our sleeves, but the main focus is cross-border payments, remittances, and such. So a bit about this workshop. I'm going to count on Gavin to tell me if anything doesn't work technically, or just poke me with questions. But basically, it's going to be a technical workshop. But as you're going to see in a bit, we're not actually going to write any code. We're going to use some tools to craft transactions and submit it to the network. And we're going to have a lot of fun. And all you need to participate is a browser and a text editor. So I'm going to share my screen here.
While he's doing that, I'll give a quick intro. My name's Gavin, work with the IDEO Collab. I've been in this space for a while. I was a founding engineer at BitGo a long time ago. And now for the last several years, I've been at the IDEO Collab, effectively working at the intersection of engineering and design, and seeing how we bring two worlds together as these protocols start to become something that form kind of a foundation layer for the next round of infrastructure. With that, I'm going to cancel my video, so I'll be around, Tomer, but if you need anything, I'll be here. I'm just going to go quiet.
Cool, sure. Just can you say something once every few minutes that I feel like I don't talk to myself?
Happily.
Okay, thanks, Gavin.
You make bad jokes, I'll laugh.
Awesome, I'm really good with that. Cool, so I said that Stellar is a payments network, so we're going to start with Hello World, which is essentially a payment. So the two main tools that we're going to start with, and we're going to introduce some more along the way, are Stellar Laboratory and Stellar Expert. Laboratory is a tool that we maintain here at the SDF, and it's a really great tool for developers, and developers in the ecosystem love it because it's just a really thin UI on top of the JavaScript SDK. So people will play around with the lab, prototype on it, and then once they figure out what it is that they actually want to do, they'll take the exact things that they did in Laboratory and they can translate them to code. So we're going to use Laboratory a lot during this session. Stellar Expert is a block explorer, and I'm sure you've heard of block explorers in other networks. We have a bunch of them in Stellar, but it's a really neat one. You get a lot of stats and really full, complete information on anything you're looking for, and we're going to demonstrate that in a second. So without further ado, what I want to do is I want to create two accounts and send a payment from one account to the other. So like you're probably familiar from other networks, an account in Stellar is represented as a key pair. And these key pairs are public-private key pairs. The public key is your identity. So if I want someone to send me lumens, I'll tell them, hey, this is my public address, and they'll send it over here. But if I want to send to someone else, I'll need to use my secret key, which is kind of like a password. Specifically on the test network, and I should say that Laboratory has, here in the upper right corner, you can choose which network you're working on. It can be the test network, the public network, or a custom network, which is a you can run your own Stellar network, a standalone network. And in the test network, we have a very unique thing called FriendBot. FriendBot is basically kind of like a tap on other networks. It just gives you money on demand. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to write down this public-private key pair because I'm going to use it a bunch now. And I'm going to call this account 1. And I'm going to fund this account. Now, specifically on Stellar, you need someone to explicitly fund your account before you start using it. So unlike other networks where your accounts are implicitly created, here they need to be explicitly created. So because we're on test network, I can just have FriendBot fund me. So FriendBot submits a transaction to the network, and hopefully within a couple of seconds, I see that I've successfully funded. And we're going to generate another key pair. This is going to be my second account. I'm going to fund this account as well. Okay, so I have two accounts that are funded. I'm also going to take a look here at the Endpoint Explorer, which is another part of the laboratory, which basically just allows me, it's a thin wrapper around the Horizon's API. Horizon is like an API server for Stellar. Specifically, I'm going to look at the account endpoint, and I'm going to put down one of these public addresses and see that we actually have these accounts created. As you see, we have an account created. It's got an account ID, all types of things we're going to talk about later. And it's got 10,000 balance of the native asset. And the native asset is lumens, in this case, test lumens on the test network. So excellent. I have two accounts, each of them with 10,000 lumens. And just to show you that this is alive in the world, not just in laboratory, I'm going to go to Stellar Expert. So I'm going to move this around. I'm going to go to Stellar Expert, change over to testnet. I'm going to put down one of these accounts. And I can see that I actually have an account created with 10,000 XLM. Okay, so this was not something internal to laboratory. This is on testnet. Okay, so now we're going to make a payment. We're going to create a payment and execute it between account 1 and account 2. I go to Transaction Builder. Transaction Builder has a lot of things going here, and I'm going to talk about a lot of these later. For now, I'm just going to breeze over this. I'm going to use the public key of account 1 as the source account. Enter a fee here and add a single operation of type payment. I'm going to put the public key of the second account as a destination. I'm going to send the native asset, which is lumens or test lumens in this case. The amount will be 100. And I'm going to go sign this transaction in the transaction signer. To sign it, I'm going to need the secret key of the sender. Going to have this move to post-transaction. After it's signed, submit it to the network. And hopefully, if the gods of demo are nice. Okay, cool. So this transaction has been successful. So if I'm going to look at account 2 now, in the account endpoint, then hopefully I'm going to see not 10,000, but 10,100. Okay, so this is a magical thing happened in the world. We sent payment from one account to another, and that is pretty cool. Okay, cool. So let's take a look a bit deeper into Stellar Expert. So we saw that, let's take a look at this account as well. So like we said, we see that there's 10,100 XLMs here. And Stellar Expert shows you a bit about your account, what type of assets do you own, and your history of operations. And I want to talk a bit about this concept of assets, because one of the great things about Stellar is that it's really there to facilitate the issuance of assets. And sometimes these are, let's take a look at the public network, what we've got here. So these are actual active assets on the public networks, and you see on the public network, and you see things like Mobius, which is a token that was ICO'd on Stellar a couple of years ago, SLT, Smartlands, same. But you also see assets like BTC and ETH, and these are assets that come from outside of the network, but someone anchors them to the network. And we're going to talk a bit about these type of assets later. But what I want to do now is actually issue an asset on the Stellar network to show you how insanely easy it is. So if you've ever issued an asset on a different network, let's say Ethereum, for example, you know that you need to deploy an ERC20 smart contract, which essentially means that you probably copied and pasted somewhere from the internet an ERC20 contract. It's a lot easier here. So we're going to do this. And for the purpose of this demo, let's just get this in place. Okay. So for the purpose of this demo, we're going to say that the first account that I created, I'm going to call this an issuer. And the second account is going to be the distributor. And the reason for that is that usually, and this is a design pattern, you don't have to do it this way, but usually we'll have, the issuer will have two accounts. One is the account's actually issuing the assets. The second account is the account that's distributing the assets. And we'll see why that's like that in a second, but essentially an asset on Stellar is kind of like, it's kind of like religion. You need someone to believe in it before it actually exists. So
that's deep.
That's, yeah, you know, maybe we need to censor that specific one from the recording. So yeah, so let's see how we do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the distributor account open a trust line to the issuer. And this is kind of like how we believe in an asset. We open a trust line. So I'm going to craft a transaction coming from the distributor. And I'm going to issue a payment that is I'm going to issue an operation that's actually a change trust operation. The asset code is going to be TOML. It's going to be my token. And it says issuer cannot be null because I need to actually put the issuer public ID here. Okay, I'm going to sign a transaction signer with the secret key of account 2. Submit this to the network. Notice how every time I submit a transaction to the network, I get a final result within around 5 seconds, which is pretty cool for a blockchain. And we can talk a bit about performance characteristics later, but this is not something that's unique to the test network. This is true for all Stellar networks. Okay, so this worked, and I can go to the account's endpoint, and I'll now see that suddenly I have a TOML balance, and the TOML balance is 0 because the issuer hasn't issued any, but the network recognizes this asset. And if I look at this account in Stellar Expert, I will in fact see that it does not exist because I chose the wrong network. If I chose the right network, okay, so Stellar Expert as well sees that I have 0 TOML tokens. Okay, so let's actually issue some of these. So now that I have a trust line to TOML tokens from my distributor account, I can go to Transaction Builder again, put in my public key, and craft the transaction. And this is going to be just a simple payment to my distributor. But instead of doing a native asset payment, I'm going to do alphanumeric, which is the type of asset that I have here. I'm going to put myself as the public key, as the issuer key. Payment operation requires amount. So I'm going to send 100,000 TOML tokens. Now, this is a really interesting operation because I'm paying something that doesn't exist, and I'm allowed to do that because I'm the issuer of this asset. So I'm actually giving birth to TOML tokens right now. Put in the right signer, submit to the network, and it worked, or it appears to have worked. And now if I'm going to reload that specific account, I'm going to see 100,000 TOML tokens. Okay, so now we've issued a token. It took a couple of minutes. It was super fast, super easy. And now we have this token live on the network. This is on the test network, but doing it on public one is as easy. Now, by the way, if the SEC is watching, this is not a security, and I don't promise profit or yada, yada, yada.
Demo only.
Out of TOML tokens. Okay, awesome. So now I have this asset of the network, and I want to distribute it. And what's a better way to distribute an asset than via an exchange? And the nice thing about Stellar is that Stellar actually contains a decentralized exchange baked right into the protocol. So let me show you some other tools here that we have in the ecosystem. Specifically, I'm going to show you the Stellar X DEX. And we can look at one of these tokens here, Smartlands, for example. And you can see this is the same Smartlands token that I saw in Stellar Expert. And actually, if I go on Stellar Expert and I look for the SLT token, then you will see that once it loads, you'll see that the order book is actually, it's essentially the exact same order book that you see here, because all of these are just front ends to the exact same piece of information. So there's nothing special about, or there's nothing unique about this order book compared to any other order book you're going to see in any other DEX. So for example, if I go to Stellar Port, another DEX that's built on Stellar, and I'm going to look at the SLT token, again, I'm going to see the exact same order book. Cool. So let's start distributing TOML token on the decentralized exchange. The way I do this is by submitting a different type of transaction called a manage offer transaction. And what I want to do is I'm going to have my distributor who already owns a bunch of TOML tokens. I'm going to have them sell these for 1 lumen each. So let's see how we do this. So instead of the payment operation, I'm now going to do a managed sell offer. I'm going to say that I'm selling a TOML token for my issuer. And I'm going to be buying the native token. So I'm going to be buying lumens. So I'm going to be selling TOMRs per lumens. Amount that I'm selling, let's say that I'm selling 1,000 per 1 lumen each. And I need to put an offer ID 0 in order for this to actually be a new offer. Sign in transaction signer. And submitting to the network. This appears to have succeeded. Now I can go to the offers for account endpoint and take a look at these actual offers that I have. And you'll see immediately that I indeed have one offer to sell 1,000 TOML tokens per 1 lumen each. And I can actually even look at Stellar Expert at this asset. So let's actually look at this account, see TOML tokens. And we have an order book. So this is, this is a pretty crappy order book. It's not the most liquid in the world, but this is in fact an order book. And anyone can go into the DEX right now, whether it's Stellar Port, Stellar Term, Stellar X, whatever, and actually get some TOML tokens. So we've issued a token and we've actually distributed it, which is pretty cool. Happy to take, Gavin, do we have any questions coming in, or is it just?
Nothing right now, but everybody who's listening, feel free to kind of stream them in as they're coming in.
Okay, cool, awesome.
I've got a couple questions if you.
Please.
Yeah. One of them is, so you're showing us a lot of the interface, but with people getting into do you have any links or like any of the community tool chain or things like that that you would point people towards?
Yeah, so the Stellar.org/developers page is really great. And if you actually go to the guides section, so I can actually here. Did that work? Do you guys see this? Yeah. So if you go to a send and receive money, you'll actually see a snippet of code that's essentially exactly the same thing that I did with the first demo of sending a payment.
Awesome.
Yeah. So again, this is very, and you can see from the API here, everything is super correlated to the laboratory. So any any button on laboratory correlates to a specific function on the API. Other questions, Gavin?
I've got one more. So
You got it.
you've got a DEX built in, things like that. Are there any specific, so you've got a community of people who are potentially building on this for, 6 weeks of hacking and 2 weeks of encouraging or figuring out what adoption looks like. Do you have any ideas or app areas that you'd encourage people to explore, like things that you think would be interesting that you'd like to see people build that maybe your team internally doesn't have the bandwidth, basically things that are of interest?
Yeah, so I think there are a bunch of cool, wallet applications, tip bots. I'll give you an example. One of the tools that is used a lot in our ecosystem is called Keybase. Keybase is a tool for developers for encrypted chat and like encrypted like Slack and key management. And it also has a baked-in Stellar wallet. Proper disclosure, we actually invested in Keybase. And Keybase actually allows you to build bots. So someone, I don't remember who, a couple of months ago wrote this really cool bot for Keybase that gave you essentially disposable burner phone numbers for text messages. So say, for example, you want to get a text message for 2FA, but you don't want to give your phone number. So you give this bot, you send it 2 lumens, and it gives you a number, and that number is valid for like 2 or 3 text messages. And that's it. And then it disappears. So I think building bots for Keybase, doing things like, we have a lot of people that in their workplace, they use Stellar as a way to settle debt between people. So if I buy you coffee, I might send you a few lumens over a specific wallet like Keybase, but you can have, because a lot of workplaces use things like Slack or whatever the Microsoft alternative is, it will be great to have tip bots for these other platforms. So I think any type of like innovative wallet, any type of a way to bridge different APIs, and the Keybase bot was a really good example because on one side you got the Twilio API, on the other you have people that are already active on Keybase using the Keybase API. And the Keybase API also exposes Stellar. So yeah, I think that's a pretty cool thing to do. For inspiration, there's a lot of, Stellar's been around for 4 or 5 years. There have been a lot of Stellar Bill Challenge and Stellar Community Funds, which is like this quarterly hackathon that we have in the ecosystem. So if you just browse over the winners of previous SBCs, you can see a lot of inspiration from collaborative drawing tools that paint a pixel with a transaction to text messaging via memos. A lot of, you can do a lot of creative stuff with Stellar. And you can also do, I'm going to talk a bit about anchored assets in a bit, and there's a lot of standard ecosystem standards that we can talk about. So building things like, a crypto anchor, and that's a bit more of a long-term, commitment and project, but we'd love to see people do these things. Is that a good direction, Gavin?
Yeah, that's great. And so far, so one person said, so Tony said, I'd like to learn more about Keybase bots if possible. So maybe at the end we could, if there's more context on that, feel free to share if there's anything else.
Sure. Wow, the Keybase folks would be excited to hear that. Yeah. Yeah, I think at the end I'm just gonna post some links, and the most important link that I can probably give is this one, which I will. So this is the public Stellar workspace. It's kind of like a public Slack, and most of the IRC style chat in the Stellar ecosystem happens there. So all the devs hang out there. A lot of the Keybase folks hang out there. So it's really a great place to hang out if you want to be part of the ecosystem.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks.
Cool. So I'm gonna go a bit deeper into transactions. By the way, I could talk for like a week about Stellar. So Gavin, feel free to.
I just keep going. We've got time, and honestly, it's getting people up to speed is important.
Okay, cool. Can I ask how many people we have online?
Yeah, we've got about 30 people listening right now, 26 specifically.
Okay, exciting, cool. Awesome. So what I'm going to do now is I want to go a bit deeper into transactions because I've been breezing over this screen a few times, but I want to go a bit deeper into how these transactions are actually built. So first of all, you'll notice that there's a field transaction sequence number here. And the reason for that, let's actually look at this specific account through the account endpoint. You'll see that the account has a sequence number. And a sequence number, you could think of it as the version of the account. And every time this account submits a transaction, the sequence number goes up. And whenever we craft a transaction, we need to give it the next sequence number to consume. And the reason for that is that we want to prevent replay attacks. And this is very common in the blockchain ecospace. You can see it. Ethereum has an account nonce, which is essentially the same thing. And the reason it exists is that once the network processes a transaction, we want that transaction to be invalid. And that's how we do it through the sequence number. And specifically, Laboratory gives me this very convenient utility function that just fetches the sequence number. But if you're writing code, you'll actually need to do this by yourself. You need to fetch the latest sequence number. Transactions cost money because we don't want people to spam the network, but they're pretty cheap. So the current minimum fee per operation is 100 stroops. A stroop is 10 to the -7 of a lumen. So 100 stroop is a 0.00001 lumen. Still pretty cheap. It's like a thousandth of a cent. And hopefully it will go up in the near future because the ecosystem really is trying to make that happen. Some more about transactions. Transactions can have a memo. So a memo, the most common one is a string. So I can actually just put a random string in my Stellar memo. And these are very common with exchanges or with custodial wallets. So for example, if I'm going to send over lumens to my Coinbase account, they'll say, hey, can you send it to account ABC with memo 123? And the reason for that is that Coinbase has a pool account. And you know what? As a tangent, we can actually, the fun thing about a decentralized network is that you can actually look at other people's accounts. So if I go to a public network, so Stellar Expert also maintains an accounts directory, which are accounts that people report. This is not working for me right now. Okay, the gods of demo are not with me now.
It's okay.
Okay, cool. So we can.
We've seen worse hiccups.
Okay, yeah, this works now. Cool. So for example, if I look at the Coinbase withdrawals count, I can see that Coinbase currently has around 102 million lumens in their withdrawal account. So only one of their accounts. So if you're kind of bored, you can just look around, see how much money other people have. Okay. So we talked about memo. There's also an optional time bounds field in the transaction, and time bounds is a way to set a range in which a time range in which this transaction can be submitted to the network. So let's say I set the upper time bound for 5 minutes from now. It means that if I try to submit this transaction to the network, if anyone tries to submit this transaction to the network after the 5 minutes timestamp, it won't work. So this is, the time bounds are really good for specific smart contracty style transactions, but they're also best practice. If I want to submit a transaction now, it's actually pretty smart to put an upper time bound on it, because that way I'll prevent a way for the network to process it, like, a day from now, which is a very rare thing. It probably won't happen, but just to be sure about it, I can put an upper time bound. And let's talk a bit about set options. So one thing that you might have noticed here is that a lot of things like time bounds, for example, that exist on other networks or don't exist on other networks and require some type of a smart contract. In Stellar, they're just baked right into the protocol. So the idea there is that Stellar really tries to be a batteries included type of network. It's very simple. So if you look at the list of opcodes here at Stellar, you'll see exactly 14 opcodes. And these are super high level. Things like create account and payment that we've already encountered. Things like manage sell offer, manage buy offer. So there are exactly 14 opcodes. And there's no on-chain smart contracts, right? So there's no real way for me to write code and have it run on the network, aside from these 14 opcodes. I can do some smart contract-y things using transaction composition. I'm going to talk about that later. So simplicity, everything is super simple here. So if I look at the set options operation, you'll see that I have some other things. I have asset flags, and this is in case, sorry. This is in case I'm an asset issuer. I can actually set my asset to be authorization required. If my asset is authorization required, it means that I need to whitelist accounts in order to hold it, which is something very common that we see in restricted assets. I can also set my asset to be auth revocable. Auth revocable means that not only do I need to whitelist accounts, I can also revoke their authorization at any given moment. And these are things that you need in order to comply with regulation a lot of times. I can also do things like add a signer. So I can add an additional signer, which is cool because it means that the network supports multi-sig on the wire on the protocol itself, rather than deploying a complicated smart contract to do that. And as we've seen in the past, smart contracts for multi-sig wallets can go terribly wrong.
Yes.
Why do you say yes, Gavin? What's the name you're thinking about?
I'd rather not mention publicly, but
Okay, cool, awesome. So I can add other accounts to be other keys to be signers on my account. I can also add other cool things, like I can add a hash lock, and a hash lock is a primitive that I need if I want to do cross-chain atomic swaps. And by the way, this is another cool potential project for people. There have been some proof of concepts about how to do a cross-chain atomic swap between Ethereum and Stellar, but you can also do between Stellar and other networks. And generally speaking, cross-chain atomic swaps are one of these things that are super cool in theory, but the user experience around them is usually so crappy that people don't use them enough. But building out like a really nice user experience for a cross-chain atomic swap is definitely a possibility. Some other things I can do with my account, I can set a home domain on my account, which is pretty cool, and I'll show you in a sec how people actually use that. And you'll notice that all of the operations have an optional source account. So the default for every operation is to be the same operation as the transaction, but you can actually choose a different source account for the transaction and a different source account for the operation. The reason for that is that you can actually have multiple operations in the same transaction. So usually when we talk about transaction, we talk about a single operation, but Stellar allows you to add multiple operations for a single transaction, up to 100 operations. And each of these operations can have a different source account. So we can actually have in the same transaction, a transaction from me sending over money to Gavin, and from Jed sending over money to me. So these are two different source accounts in the same transaction. Another cool thing about batching these operations is that it actually creates a dependency between these operations. So all of these operations in the transaction have an if and only if relationship and their success. So if one of the operations fail, all of the operations fail. So we talked about the fact that you don't have smart contracts on chain, but this is a really cool way to create dependency between transactions off chain. You basically craft this transaction in a way that will only succeed under specific conditions. Cool. So this is about transactions and about accounts. How are we in the questions area?
So I've got one question. It's on the deck, so you can either handle it now if you'd like to, or at the end if you want. But it's from Alejandro, and it's, how does on-ledger settlement happen in the order book? Can you explain a bit more in depth on anything there?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So let's go back to Stellar somewhere. There it is. Yeah. So let's actually buy something with real money. How much money do I have here? I have 9 XLM. Okay, it's almost $1. Cool. Let's buy something. So I can go on the Stellarport Bitcoin market. And I can say, hey, I want to spend some 5 XLM, which will get me a fraction of a BTC. Buy this BTC. And what happens now is that I'm actually submitting what in other networks or in other centralized exchanges you'd call a limit order, which means that I submit an order. If it's possible in the order book for that to be fulfilled immediately, then it's filled. But if not, it's persisted to the order book, and then it slowly gets consumed until it is fully consumed by other offers, or I can cancel it at one point. So limit offers, limit orders is the way that it works. The order books are completely on-chain, and the order matching is completely on-chain. So I know if you've heard about some other dexes, like let's say EtherDelta or 0x, that sometimes you have settlement happening on-chain, but then the order matching and the order books being off-chain. So here it's a completely on-chain solution. And because Stellar is so focused on providing these very simple operations, it's super scalable, and we can handle up to 1,000 operations per ledger today. And these operations include things like putting in an offer. Alejandro, how does that feel? Thanks. Awesome. Cool. Other questions?
Yeah, we've got something coming into, is it from Bram? Is it possible to talk about or show a working anchor and how to set it up, please?
Sure. Yeah, that is a great question. So I'm going to talk about an anchor in a second, but before that, take a note. But before that, I want to talk a bit about how Stellar communicates with the outside world. So one of the core principles about Stellar is that it understands that it's not an island, and it communicates with other networks, whether it's other banks, whether it's other crypto networks, or anything for that matter. So the question is, how do you create these links between Stellar and the outside world? And how do you create standards around using these links? And I'll give you an example. So if I look at, I'll go back to Stellar Expert and I'll look at one of our USD assets. And specifically, I'll look at Anchor USD, which is a USD anchor here in the States. And you'll see that beyond just the issuing account, there's a lot of interesting information here, and this information is not coming from the chain. So where is it coming from? If we look at the issuer account, we'll see that they've set a home domain to be anchorusd.com. Now, we have a standard in the ecosystem, which is called a TOML file. And if I go to anchorusd.com, which is their home domain, /.wellknown/TOML, then I'll reach this TOML formatted file with some extra information about AnchorUSD. And this information includes information about the organization, information about Jim, the CEO, about their actual issued USD. And A very important piece of information that they have here is they say which accounts we control. So what happened here is that Stellar points at this domain from the chain, and then this domain is pointing at this specific Stellar account. Sorry, so now we have a very strong tie between these, between the account and the domain, and we have a high certainty that the entity controlling that domain is controlling this, this account. So if I look, so this TOML file, this TOML standard is what we call a SEP. A SEP is a Stellar Ecosystem Proposal. And these SEPs define the ways that Stellar communicates with the outside world. There are about 20 SEPs, 22 SEPs. Half of them have been approved. SEP 1 is a Stellar TOML specification. And this just explains what type of fields a wallet or a block explorer expects to see from a TOML file. And this is how Stellar Expert knows what to expect from Anchor USD. So now we can talk a bit about some other interesting SEPs that we have in the ecosystem. I'm going to talk about SEP 2, which is Federation. And then I'm going to talk about SEP 6, which is the Anchor client stuff. So if you look at, let's go back to my wallet here. And I want to send some lumens to my Keybase wallet. So I'm going to click on send tokens. Now, usually here, I need to copy and paste this very long address, but Stellar actually provides a standard for doing this in a different way. Here, I could put as my recipient my address in Keybase. Now, Keybase exposes a federation service, and a federation service is a simple service that adheres to a specific spec about how do I translate a human readable address into a Stellar address. So because Keybase provides this, any other wallet that supports federation, which is essentially any wallet in the ecosystem, in the Stellar ecosystem, they can put in the recipient as this human readable address. And now my client, Stellar X in this case, will go to Keybase IO, ask them, can you tell me what is the actual Stellar account that I need to send to? I'll send 1 lumen. I don't have that much to send. Awkward. Okay, half a lumen. Continue, confirm. Okay, so the transfer has been completed. Now I have this in my Keybase account. By the way, this was a live mainnet transaction settled finally in less than 3 seconds. So I hope everyone is super impressed right now. So this is federation, and federation is defined in the federation protocol, which is SEP 2. I want to talk a bit about SEP 6. People were talking about Anchor and about setting up an Anchor. If I go back to the Stellar X app, you can see that there's a deposit. There are 2 buttons here, deposit and withdraw. And in the deposit and withdraw, one of the options is an Anchor token. And the Anchor token allows me to bridge the gap between Stellar and outside networks. And it's provided by the asset issuer. So say, for example, I want to move some BTC that I have in the real world in the Bitcoin network. I want to move it to my Stellar account. And I have a couple of BTC anchors, and anyone can be a BTC anchor. Of course, you'll choose the ones that you actually trust. And the anchors, what they do is they say, hey, you can send us this amount of BTC. We're going to issue the same thing on the Stellar network. And you can do the reverse. You can withdraw. So if I have a BTC on the Stellar network anchored by APE, for example, I can tell APay, hey, I want to withdraw this to my actual Bitcoin account. So I can bring Bitcoin into the system, trade it with other assets. And if I have Bitcoin, I can actually trade it back or withdraw it back to the Bitcoin ecosystem. And here, StellarX supports two BTC anchors, APay and now BTC. I can click on one of them, and now I get instructions for how I deposit BTC directly into my Stellar account. And the interesting thing here is now anyone can open an anchor, and anyone can essentially build a service that does these things. But the unique thing about what StellarX does here is that StellarX supports the SEP6 protocol. And SEP6 creates a standard or defines a standard for how to on-ramp and off-ramp from Stellar and to Stellar. And these standards, once the wallet supports them, any anchor that supports them is automatically compatible with this. So in this case, now BTC and APay have conformed to the standard. And the standard is actually fairly simple. I won't go, it's a pretty long document. I won't, because it's very detailed, so I'm not going to go into the specifics. But essentially, if you're an anchor, all you need to do is you need to implement these three endpoints on your transfer server. And these three endpoints, once the wallet detects that you have a transfer server associated with your account, with your asset, then it will use these three endpoints. And the way that you define a transfer server, much like a lot of the other SEPs, you define it through the TOML specification. So in here, there's a thing called the transfer server. And through your TOML file, you'll broadcast to the world, hey, I have a transfer server, so that the wallet knows how to use it. And then when the wallet encounters that asset, it will actually query that transfer server for a deposit, withdraw, and info. So it's fairly simple. And you can anchor assets from anywhere. You can anchor points from your game that you develop. You can anchor dollars, of course. You can anchor crypto. You can anchor community points in Reddit. You can really anchor any asset into the Stellar network. Okay, so I'm gonna take a quick break here. Gavin, what do we have anything coming?
Yeah, there's another one on Pascal is considering building an SMS-based app on top of Stellar. Do you have any advice on how people can implement like a one-to-many transaction, like an airdrop?
A one-to-many transaction. So airdrops are a funny thing. In Stellar, they're a bit more complicated because in other networks, you don't have this concept of a trust line, right? So I can send an asset to anyone, even if they don't have an account yet, even if they don't trust my asset, because everything is super implicit. So in Stellar, say for example, I want to airdrop my TOML tokens that I just created. I actually need to get people to open a trust line to TOML token first. I can circumvent that with multisig. So another thing that I can do is that I can create accounts for the people I airdrop to and put them as a signer on that account. So say, for example, that Pascal wants to airdrop to 1,000 people. He can essentially open 1,000 accounts for these people and have them be signers on these accounts. And then they have access and they can pull these funds out of these accounts, which is great. The problem there is that it actually costs Pascal money to do that, because an account has a minimum balance in Stellar, which is, I won't get into the calculation of that, but it's around 1 to 2 lumens. So if you want to airdrop, you actually need to put some lumens into the airdrop. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple more coming in here.
Okay.
Is there another way to confirm the anchor is holding the amount of received assets? And if not, is it a consideration to offer a point so users can check if the anchor is holding the assets one-to-one?
Yeah, so a lot of financial institutions and crypto anchors will try to provide you evidence, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like your bank. You give them $100, they put $100 in your balance. Uh, can they prove that they have $100? They can't because they don't have all the money for all the balances. But there's a combination here of real life trust, and you definitely want to put your trust into an anchor. You'll probably trust a Wells Fargo anchor more than you trust a Gavin anchor.
No offense taken.
Okay. But yeah, so we do a lot of the anchors we work with are regulated in the jurisdiction. So you really want to make sure that you're using the right anchor.
Actually, speaking of jurisdictions, somebody asked about. Can you talk anything about KYC?
Sure. So Trust in Stellar has different models, and almost always it's based around. I'll actually we have another SEP that talks about KYC. I'm just going to put it in the background here, and so if you're an asset issuer, you can have different models for how you model trust. One of them is you can do KYC checks on the way in and out, and a lot of anchors do that. So on the on ramp, if you want to deposit dollars into Stellar, or if you want to withdraw dollars from Stellar, then you'll go through a KYC process. We actually defined SEP 9 and SEP 12, which allow for a non-interactive KYC flow. So for example, if your anchor implements these SEPs, they can do this non-interactive. They can negotiate KYC with your wallet, so you can input all your KYC information to the wallet once, and then it will negotiate with the anchors. Though most of the anchors prefer to do it interactively with their own KYC environment, because different anchors have different KYC requirements. So on and off ramp is the most common way to do KYC. Some assets require more regulation, and they want not only to KYC on the way in and out, they want to KYC every holder of this balance. So even if you just hold a balance of TOML token, I want to authorize this person. And the way you do that is you use the auth revocable. Let's see if I can find this. Yeah, so we have requiring or revoking authorization. I can paste this here. So requiring authorization means that I can set on-chain my asset to be auth required every time that a user wants to hold this asset. They need to let me know in advance, and I need to whitelist them. So this is a bit more of an extreme type of KYC requirement, and not a lot of issuers use it right now. But as regulation fluctuates, and we're probably going to see more of these around.
All right.
Okay. Cool. So I talked about transactions. I talked about SEPs and anchored assets. I'm not going to go on for much longer, but I do want to talk a bit about consensus. So one thing that we didn't really talk about is how does the network actually, so Stellar is a decentralized ledger, how do validators or nodes actually agree on anything on the network? Mostly, how do we agree on what transactions we're seeing, and how do we agree on what's the next ledger state? So other networks such as Bitcoin, for example, have this concept of proof of work, which means that I trust whoever brings in the most computational power into the network. Some networks have this concept of proof of stake, which essentially means I'm gonna put trust in stakers, which are validators that are willing to put their money where their mouth is. In Stellar is a bit different because Stellar is modeled on real life trust. So rather than putting my trust into a random set of mining rigs somewhere in the world, as a person running a validator, I actually choose which nodes on the network I choose, which nodes I trust. And the network will take all of these nodes and build a graph of trust. So, and that graph of trust is what actually determines consensus on the network. And every 5 seconds, the network kind of like convenes and tries to decide on the next step based on the quorum intersection. So based on how that graph is configured. So if you look, for example, at one of these, Stellar Beat is a really cool interface for looking at the current quorum of the network. It essentially crawls the entire network every few minutes. It measures uptime for different validators. It brings up geolocations. It scraps TOML files for more information. So highly recommend this tool to understand what's going on. So here you see the Lobster 5 validator. Lobster is a really cool Stellar wallet. It's been around for a few years now. And this is Lobster 5. It's located in Australia. You can see that it's part of the Lobster entity. So all of these validators belong to the same entity, which is Lobster or organization. And this is the actual trust model for Lobster 5. So it essentially puts trust in these 5 organizations, each with a different threshold. So it puts trust in the Stellar Development Foundation, which runs a couple of validators, in a CoinQVest, which is another company that operates on Stellar, Satoshi Pay, Keybase, and their other Lobster validators. So you can actually see the entire model of trust here, and for every validator, you can see all the information about the node from IP port, things like when was it first discovered, is it validating, and all of these cool attributes. You can also look at the organization tab, which is a new tab that Stellar Beat added lately. It shows you the different organizations that are active on Stellar and how much and how's their uptime like. And you can see that we have a fair amount of organizations that have more than one validator with a good uptime. So that's a bit about consensus. And I think I'll stop there. Gavin, what do you think?
I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yes. One last thing that I want to talk about. We talked about smart contracts a bit. I want to give you a link to a smart contract guide. Okay, so one thing that's it's been happening over the past few years is that a lot of networks have started doing these on-chain smart contracts. You're probably most familiar with Ethereum, and these are all really super cool and awesome. But we got to remember that if you look at the origins of smart contracts in the late '90s and Nick Szabo's work, then he talks about smart contracts as a way to digitally enforce financial contracts. And nowhere in the way was there a discussion about on-chain arbitrary code, especially not Turing complete. And you can still do smart contracts in Stellar, but the way you do smart contracts in Stellar is by composing transactions in a way that create various constraints. So a very simple example is an escrow account. Say, for example, that I want to give Gavin 1,000 lumens, but I only want him to get access to it a year from now. So I can essentially create this multi-sig account, put us both signers on it, and give Gavin a transaction for a year from now to unlock these funds. So I haven't actually ran any code on chain, but I've created a smart contract in which this escrow is guaranteed to open up in a year from now. So the way that you can think about it is that if you look at if we look back at the transaction sequence number actually gives us a way to order things. So if I create 3 different transactions with the same sequence number, only one of them can make it, and then it invalidates the others. If I do things like create time bounds, then I actually create timing on transactions, passive timing, to make sure that a transaction can only be submitted at a specific point in time. The composing operations allows me to do kind of like very simple dependency. So if and only if. So this operation will only work if and if this other operation works. So there are a bunch of ways to create smart contracts, and that specific resource shows some of them. And this is another cool project that one can do. One can have things like escrow accounts are pretty cool pretty easy from the protocol perspective, but we haven't seen really great user experience on how to build escrow accounts. So you can search the web. There are a bunch of smart contracts blog posts around Stellar, and think about how I can create a best user experience for that. And now I'm done for good.
All right. All right, people. So let's take the last couple of minutes. You've got some thanks coming in. Hey, really nice job working. That's a lot of content. And so thanks, Tomer.
Thank you.
Beautiful walkthrough. All right. So for everybody who's listening, let's take just a couple minutes. If you have any questions or anything, now is kind of a good time. You've got the expert on the line to answer anything. So we'll leave it open for a second, see what shakes out.
Okay, cool. How's your day, Gavin?
Oh, beautiful. Fog is just burning off in my. Hey, you're getting a lot of kudos from people. Thanks, fantastic presentation. So not too big of a fight.
Awesome. Yeah, I now close the door so I can see this. Exciting. Okay.
Well, it looks like a whole lot of thanks, and I will follow up on that thanks and say thanks for putting this together and for walking everybody through and onboarding people into the ecosystem like this. They appreciate it. I know I do too. And everybody joining, thanks a ton.
Awesome. The last thing that I'm going to say, Stellar ecosystem is really super friendly. So go to the Stellar subreddit, go to Keybase, and we're here to help you out getting started. And if anyone is, and I told you this, Gavin, personally, if anyone is, if any groups are forming in San Francisco and they want some mentorship, we can definitely help out with that.
All right. Do you have any contact info you'd want to pop into the chat by any means?
Sure. So my favorite communication method of all time is email. So I'm tomer@stellar.org, but let me also put in my, feel free to follow me on Keybase, talk to me on Keybase. Those are the best.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Happy hacking. Oh, wait, one last question. Any presence in the UK for IRL contact?
I will not comment on that.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Chris. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and happy hacking.